What's going on? Another episode of Extreme Atheism coming at you. Today we're going to talk about fine-tuning argument, which is the argument used by theists and agnostics to say that the constants of the universe, such as the speed of light, Hubble constant, are fine-tuned just to create humans. And we're going to look at this subject from the point of view of Robert Rosenkranz.
So Robert, why this debate? Why does this one intrigue you in particular? Because I know it does.
He's the guy who launched the Intelligence Squared debates in the United States in 2006, who got interested in the God debates after reading Martin Rees's 1999 book, Just Six Numbers. Let's hear what he has to say.
Well, I kind of got interested in this topic by reading a book about science. It was by the Astronomer Royal of England, a man called Martin Rees, and the book was called Just Six Numbers.
Mathematical laws underpin the fabric of our universe, not just atoms, but galaxies, stars, and people. The properties of atoms, their sizes and masses, how many different kinds there are, and the forces linking them together, determine the chemistry of our everyday world.
And it was about 6 physical constants that were imprinted in the early universe in the first 100 millionth of a second after the Big Bang.
The host is just nodding his head. He's like, oh, duh.
And these constants express ideas like the strength of gravity, the strength of the bond that keeps the nucleus of atoms together.
The very existence of atoms depends on forces and particles deep inside them. The objects that astronomers study, planets, stars, and galaxies, are controlled by the force of gravity.
The uniformity of that initial fireball.
And everything takes place in the arena of an expanding universe, whose properties were imprinted into it at the time of the initial Big Bang.
And if any of those 6 numbers was much larger or much smaller...
This book describes 6 numbers that now seem especially significant. 2 of them relate to the basic forces. 2 fix the size and overall texture of our universe and determine whether it will continue forever, and 2 more fix the properties of space itself.
We would really not have a universe. Either stars and galaxies wouldn't have formed, or there'd be no elements as complicated as carbon and oxygen.
That's just a lot of double talk. I happen to have a copy of Michael Rowan-Robinson's The 9 Numbers of the Cosmos, published the same year as Rees's book, and he says, why 9 numbers? It could have been 10 or 100. Then he gives the example of how astronomers get all loopy when they find certain patterns in numbers. I could have used the so-called Eddington numbers, the numbers that Arthur Eddington in the 1930s found that if you work out the ratio of the electromagnetic force between an electron and proton to the gravitational force between them, and also the ratio between the radius of the universe and the classical radius of the electron, both ratios come out to be almost exactly 10 to the power of 40. And Eddington supposedly said this could not be coincidence, but he didn't go on and attribute this to the work of a creator.
And when you think about this, or at least for me, I thought, could this be just chance, or is there some uncanny intelligence at work in this early design?
To keep everybody in the loop, Rees, pictured here, who Rosenkranz is citing, in 2011 cashed in on a $1 million Templeton Prize for career achievements which affirm life's spiritual dimensions. Rees, however, is an astronomer, and astronomers don't measure spirits. Subsequently, the acceptance of the Templeton Prize by a leading astronomer falsely validates the idea that spirits and gods exist. He took a lot of heat for this. Harry Kroto, winner of the 1996 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, for example, said, "This news is really quite shocking, bad for science in general, bad for the Royal Society, and bad for the United Kingdom." Likewise, Richard Roberts, winner of the 1993 Nobel Prize in Medicine, said it was terrible for Rees to accept the Templeton Prize. He says, "It only adds more validity to an organization pushing the wrong agenda, which specifically is to honor a person who has tried to comprehend the many and diverse manifestations of the divine."
And for what we're doing here tonight, why is this not, this has been going on for a long time, this conversation, why is this not just the Scopes monkey trial all over again?
Well, because I think this conversation should be much more sophisticated than one dealing with the literal truth of something in the Old Testament.
What he means here by pushing the wrong agenda is that astronomers, physicists, and chemists do not measure spirit. But when you say someone is down in spirits, you can explain that in terms of thermodynamics, but you don't need to justify it with recourse to antiquated historical baggage such as spirit, soul, and God. That's old hat theory that doesn't fit anymore.
And in addition, of course, science has moved on so much since that time.
Okay, so yes, science is progressing past the days of the Scopes monkey trial, but it has not yet progressed past the point of the God problem, which historically, in regards to the subject we're discussing today, is generally known as the anthropic principle, which was conceived in 1970 by Australian theoretical physicist Brandon Carter, who in his day was having problems with what is called the exaggerated Copernican principle. It states that we must not assume gratuitously that we occupy a privileged central position in the universe, according to which, in the strong position extension of this logic, that our position cannot be privileged in any sense. Carter goes on, in opposition to this dogma, as he calls it, to cite American physicist Robert Dickey's 1961 work, and states that special favorable conditions such as temperature, chemical environments, etc., are prerequisite for our existence. Then he says the universe evolves and is by no means spatially homogeneous on a local scale. And from this he jumps to what he calls his anthropic principle, which states that what we can expect to observe must be restricted by the conditions necessary for our presence as observers. Although our situation is not necessarily central, it is inevitably privileged to some extent. Then he goes on to cite what he calls large number of coincidences. For example, that all stars, whether red giants, white dwarfs, or neutron stars, always have a mass equal in order of magnitude to the inverse of the gravitational coupling constant. Oh yeah, that explains why I'm privileged. Then he jumps to the conclusion that these supposed coincidences are evidence that the universe, or rather the fundamental constants of the universe, were fine-tuned by God, or rather the hand of God. To conclude for today's lecture, our position in the universe is not privileged in any sense of the matter. We simply happen to be animated atomic geometries moving owing to our position around a medium-sized star. And this conclusion is evidenced by the fact that on page 8 of Rowan-Robinson's book, he says, "We exist, we are not in a special place, the universe is expanding, and the universe is of finite age."